The mysterious duel. The underground arena was filled with the deafening roar of the crowd. Hundreds of aliens from different corners of the galaxy gathered around the massive fighting pit, their glowing eyes locked onto the stage below. The air smelled of sweat, blood, and excitement. This was not just a fight, it was a spectacle. Ethan Carter stood at the center of the pit, rolling his shoulders as he prepared for the match. He had fought in many places before, on dusty planets, on lawless space stations, in the hidden arenas of the galaxy where rules didn't exist. But something about this fight felt off. His opponent stepped forward, and the crowd erupted in cheers. Ethan raised an eyebrow as he got his first good look at her. She wasn't what he expected. The alien girl was tall, with dark violet skin and sharp, feline-like eyes that seemed to glow under the bright arena lights. She had an athletic build, lean but strong. Unlike most fighters, she wasn't covered in heavy armor or carrying a weapon. She only wore a simple combat suit, one that allowed full mobility. Then she smirked. "Wait, you're a Deathworlder too?" she asked, amusement clear in her voice. Ethan froze. His heartbeat slowed. Deathworlder. It was a term feared across the galaxy. A Deathworlder was someone from a planet so dangerous, so full of deadly creatures, extreme weather, and harsh survival conditions that only the strongest could live there. Humans were Deathworlders. That was why the galaxy feared them. But this girl, she wasn't human. Ethan narrowed his eyes. "What did you just say?" The girl chuckled. "You heard me. You're a Deathworlder. So am I." Ethan had fought all kinds of aliens before, warriors with 4 arms, beasts with thick armor-like skin, even telepaths who could predict his moves. But none of them had ever called themselves Deathworlders. A loud horn echoed across the arena. The match had officially begun. Velthera, as the announcer had called her, didn't hesitate. She rushed forward like lightning, faster than Ethan expected. He barely dodged her first strike. She moved like a trained fighter, her fists aimed precisely at his weak spots. Ethan countered with a quick jab, but she dodged with perfect timing, her smirk never fading. The crowd roared in excitement. Ethan focused. His mind worked like a machine, analyzing her movements. She wasn't just fast. She knew exactly how a human fought. She threw a high kick. Ethan blocked. He stepped forward with a counter-strike. She ducked. They moved in sync, their blows nearly colliding but never landing. It was like fighting a mirror, except she wasn't human. "You're holding back," she teased. Ethan clenched his fists. "You haven't seen anything yet." With a burst of speed, he feinted left and landed a solid punch to her ribs. The impact was enough to send any normal fighter stumbling back. But Velthera, she just grinned. Then, before he could react, she struck back. Ethan barely had time to block as her fist slammed into his guard with the force of a hammer. He felt the shock run through his arm, his muscles straining to absorb the impact. The crowd gasped. That wasn't normal. No alien that looked like her should be this strong. Ethan jumped back, shaking his arm. He had fought enhanced fighters before, those with cybernetic implants, strength-boosting drugs, or genetic modifications. But Velthera had none of that. She was naturally this strong. "What are you?" Ethan finally asked. Her golden eyes gleamed. "Figuring it out already." The fight continued, both of them pushing harder. Ethan's instincts screamed at him. This wasn't a regular fight. This was a test. Velthera wanted to see how strong he was. The crowd was losing their minds. This was the best fight they had ever seen. 2 warriors who refused to back down, each strike getting faster, each block getting tighter. Then suddenly, Velthera stepped back. The announcer hesitated. The match wasn't over, but neither of them moved. Ethan stayed on guard. Velthera tilted her head. Then, in a calm voice, she said, "This is boring." The arena went silent. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me." She shrugged. "You're good, but I was hoping for more." Guess I expected too much from a human. Ethan felt something strange, a mix of frustration and curiosity. He had never met an alien who could fight like this, and now she was acting like she wasn't even trying. Before he could respond, the arena's lights flickered. A second later, alarms blared. The fight was over, but something far worse was coming. The station was under attack. Velthera's smirk disappeared. For the first time, she looked serious. Ethan clenched his fists. This night was just getting started. The battle of equals. The underground arena was in chaos. The blaring alarms drowned out the sounds of the roaring crowd. Security forces rushed to the exits. Fighters backed away from the pit, and the large screens around the stadium flashed red with an urgent message. Warning. Unidentified hostile forces. DTTTD. Lockdown INITIATD. Ethan Carter didn't move. His breathing was steady, his mind sharp. He was still standing in the center of the arena, his fists clenched, his muscles coiled like a spring. He wasn't focused on the alarms. He was focused on her. Velthera, the alien girl, his opponent, the one who had just matched him blow for blow in combat, something no non-human had ever done before. She stood there, relaxed, not even flinching at the sirens. Her golden eyes glowed faintly under the dim arena lights, filled with something that disturbed Ethan. Excitement. Trouble's coming, Ethan muttered, taking a half-step back, still keeping his eyes on her. Velthera tilted her head. You're not scared. It wasn't a question. Ethan didn't answer. He had learned a long time ago that fear was pointless. Fear made people hesitate. Hesitation got people killed. If a fight was coming, he would deal with it. Velthera smirked again, the same smirk she gave before their fight began. Then, without warning, boom! An explosion rocked the arena. The shockwave sent a few spectators flying, and dust filled the air. A massive section of the outer wall collapsed, revealing a dark metal hallway beyond it. Armed figures stepped through the smoke. Ethan recognized them immediately. Mercenaries. Their armor was mismatched. Some wore heavy tactical plating. Others had sleek, black exosuits. Each one carried a high-powered weapon, most likely plasma-based. The lead mercenary, a towering reptilian alien with a scar across his snout, stepped forward and pointed directly at Ethan and Velthera. There they are, the alien barked. Both of them. Take them alive. Ethan's blood ran cold. They weren't just here for him. They were here for her too. Velthera sighed. Great. They just couldn't wait, could they? Ethan snapped his gaze to her. She knew. She wasn't surprised. She wasn't even worried. You knew this was coming, he demanded. She turned to him, stretching her arms casually. Not exactly. But I figured it was only a matter of time before someone tried something stupid. Ethan didn't have time to process that. The mercenaries raised their weapons. Instinct kicked in. In a fraction of a second, Ethan dove sideways just as the first plasma bolt was fired. The energy blast burned through the air where he had been standing just moments ago. He hit the ground, rolled to absorb the impact, and grabbed the nearest piece of debris for cover. Another blast, then another. The arena was now a war zone. Screaming civilians ran for the exits as security forces exchanged fire with the intruders. Chaos erupted everywhere. Velthera, however, didn't run for cover. Instead, she stood tall, her stance calm, her eyes locked onto the mercenaries like a predator eyeing prey. One of them raised a rifle toward her. Then she moved. Ethan had never seen anything like it. 1 second, she was standing still. The next, she was a blur. Before the mercenary could fire, she closed the distance in an instant. A single, precise motion. She grabbed the barrel of the rifle, twisted it out of the alien's hands, and in the same fluid movement, brought her elbow crashing into his face. Cracky. The mercenary went down instantly. Another one tried to react, swinging the butt of his weapon at her head, but she was already moving. She ducked under the swing, grabbed the attacker's arm, and with a simple, almost effortless motion, she flipped him over her shoulder, slamming him into the ground. Ethan's brain struggled to keep up. She wasn't just fast. She was beyond fast. She was fighting like a trained assassin, like a human soldier with years of combat experience. Another mercenary aimed at her. This time, Ethan didn't think. He lunged forward. Before the alien could pull the trigger, Ethan slammed his fist into his gut, knocking the wind out of him. He twisted the rifle out of the alien's hands and turned it around. Bang! A single shot. Direct hit. The mercenary crumpled to the floor. Velthera turned her head slightly. For the first time, her smirk was gone. She was studying him now, as if she had just confirmed something. Ethan ignored her gaze. He had more important things to worry about. The mercenaries weren't stopping. More were pouring in through the destroyed wall. "We need to get out of here," he muttered. Velthera wiped blood from her knuckles and let out a small, amused chuckle. "Oh, I don't know. I think I'm enjoying myself." Ethan gave her a sharp look. "You do realize they're here for you too, right?" She finally sighed. "Fine. You're no fun." She stepped closer to him. "You have a plan, Deathworlder." Ethan's mind was already racing. He scanned the arena, searching for an escape route. He spotted a side tunnel, partially hidden behind debris. If they could reach it, they might be able to escape into the lower levels of the station. "There," he said, nodding toward it. "We move fast." Velthera grinned again. "I was hoping you'd say that." The two of them took off, weaving through the battlefield. Plasma bolts streaked past them, hitting the ground and sending sparks flying. Ethan moved with calculated precision, ducking, rolling, never stopping. But Velthera, she was moving like a ghost. Every step, every movement, it was perfect. Too perfect. Ethan clenched his jaw. Just what the hell was she? The mercenaries roared in frustration as the two Deathworlders disappeared into the dark tunnels below. The hunt had just begun. Secrets in the dark. The tunnels beneath the arena were damp, dimly lit, and filled with the scent of rusted metal and stagnant air. Faint emergency lights flickered along the walls, casting eerie shadows as Ethan Carter and Velthera sprinted through the narrow corridors. Behind them, the echoes of distant gunfire and explosions faded as they delved deeper into the station's underbelly. Ethan didn't slow down. His breathing was controlled, his movements sharp. Years of surviving on hostile planets had trained him to keep moving, no matter how exhausted he felt. His body ran on instinct, on pure survival drive. But Velthera, she wasn't even breaking a sweat. Ethan stole a glance at her as they ran. She moved effortlessly, her posture relaxed, her breathing steady, as if this was just another evening jog. What the hell was she? His gut told him she was dangerous. Not in the way an enemy soldier was dangerous, not in the way a mercenary with a loaded rifle was dangerous. She was something else, something unknown. Ethan gritted his teeth. Now wasn't the time for questions. First, they needed to escape. They reached a fork in the tunnels. Ethan stopped, scanning both paths. One tunnel sloped downward, leading deeper into the lower levels of the station, likely toward maintenance sectors and old storage rooms. The other curved upward, possibly toward docking bays or security checkpoints. Velthera tilted her head. Lost already? Ethan shot her a look. "I'm thinking." She smirked. "Thinking slows you down. Move." Before he could argue, a metallic clank echoed from behind them. Ethan's muscles tensed. That was a motion sensor trigger. "They're tracking us," he muttered. Velthera didn't look worried. Instead, she simply nodded toward the downward path. "Deeper is better. Harder to find us." Ethan hesitated. He didn't like going deeper into unknown territory. But she wasn't wrong. The upper path likely had security checkpoints, which meant locked doors and automated defenses. "Fine, stay close," he said, moving into the lower tunnel. Velthera chuckled. You should be telling yourself that. The lower depths. The air grew colder as they descended. The walls were lined with ancient wiring, leaking pipes, and forgotten maintenance drones covered in dust. The station had clearly expanded over the years, leaving these lower levels abandoned. They moved in silence, the only sound being the occasional drip of water and the hum of old ventilation systems. Ethan took the lead, moving cautiously, checking every corner before stepping forward. His instincts screamed that something was off. And then, Velthera vanished. One moment, she was behind him. The next, gone. Ethan whirled around, fists clenched, his pulse spiking. Velthera. Silence. His mind raced. Had she been grabbed, pulled into a side tunnel? No, he would have heard something. And then, right beside him. "You're slow," her voice murmured. Ethan snapped his head toward the sound. Velthera was standing there, her golden eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. She was completely still, as if she had been there the whole time. Except she hadn't. Ethan felt his blood run cold. He hadn't heard her move. Not a single step. "Where did you just go?" he demanded. Velthera just grinned. "I was testing something." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "Testing what?" She shrugged. "How aware you are." Ethan clenched his jaw. "That's not an answer." Velthera's smirk faded slightly, replaced by something else. Curiosity. "You're different from the others," she said. Ethan frowned. "What others?" Velthera leaned against the wall, crossing her arms. "Humans." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "I am human." "I know," she said. "That's why I'm surprised." Ethan didn't like where this was going. He folded his arms. "You want to explain that?" Velthera studied him for a moment, then finally sighed. "All right. Since we're stuck down here, might as well tell you a little secret." She stepped closer, her glowing eyes locked onto his. "I'm not what I seem." Ethan wasn't surprised. He had already figured that out. "No kidding." She smirked. "My people, the Deathworlders, aren't considered a Deathworld species. We come from a lush, peaceful planet. We shouldn't be able to fight like this." Ethan stayed silent. "But," she continued, "I wasn't raised there." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Then where?" She chuckled. "You wouldn't believe me. Try me." Velthera's golden eyes gleamed. "I was raised on Earth." Ethan stared. For the first time since this whole mess started, he was completely speechless. He blinked. Once. Twice. Then, finally. "What?" Velthera grinned. "You heard me. I was raised on your homeworld. Among your people. And let me tell you, your planet is absolutely insane." Ethan still couldn't fully process what she had just said. An alien? Raised on Earth? That didn't happen. Earth didn't allow aliens to live there. The planet was too dangerous, too unpredictable. Even the Galactic Council warned non-humans to avoid it at all costs. And yet, this girl, this Seldar, was claiming she had been there. "Impossible," Ethan muttered. Velthera laughed. "I thought you'd say that." Ethan clenched his fists. "Prove it." Velthera's smirk widened. Then, without warning, she shifted her stance. Ethan recognized it instantly. A human combat stance. One only taught in elite military circles. Velthera's voice was softer now, almost amused. "You know it, don't you?" Ethan didn't respond. He didn't need to. She was right. She had been trained in human combat, which meant she was telling the truth. Ethan exhaled slowly. "Who trained you?" Velthera's smile faded. For the first time, she looked different. Not amused. Not cocky. Serious. "I'll tell you later," she said. "Right now, we have company." Ethan stiffened. Then he heard it too. Heavy footsteps. A lot of them. The mercenaries had found them. Velthera's smirk returned. "Time for round 2, Deathworlder." Ethan cracked his knuckles. He had a feeling this was only the beginning. The Deathworlders unite. The low hum of the tunnel vibrated under Ethan's boots as he crouched behind a rusted metal pipe, his breathing slow and controlled. The mercenaries had found them. The rhythmic clanking of heavy boots against the steel floor grew closer, organized, disciplined, professional. These weren't just thugs for hire. Whoever sent them had money, resources, and a damn good reason to want both him and Velthera alive. Ethan stole a quick glance at his companion. Velthera stood completely still, her golden eyes glowing faintly in the dim emergency lighting. She wasn't hiding like he was. She wasn't even in a combat stance. She simply stood there, arms crossed, head slightly tilted, watching the approaching shadows. "Are you planning to fight or just stand there and smirk?" Ethan muttered under his breath. Velthera chuckled. "A little of both." Ethan gritted his teeth. He had fought alongside elite human soldiers, battled monstrous creatures on savage planets, and survived ambushes that should have killed him 10 times over. But nothing unnerved him more than the way this alien girl acted, like she knew exactly what was about to happen. And she wasn't afraid. That meant one of two things. Either she was overconfident, or she was truly dangerous. The mercenaries came into view. A dozen heavily armed figures, each clad in reinforced combat armor, weapons raised, visors scanning the area. Their leader, a towering reptilian alien with deep scars running down his snout, stepped forward. His voice was rough, mechanical, as he barked out orders. "Surround them. No sudden movements." The mercenaries fanned out, forming a tight semicircle around Ethan and Velthera. Their plasma rifles hummed with energy, deadly and precise. "Stand down," the reptilian leader growled. "You're coming with us." Ethan exhaled, his hands tightening into fists. This was bad. They were boxed in. Even if he took down one or two, there were too many to handle at once. And Velthera, he glanced at her again. She was grinning. That was the moment Ethan realized something terrifying. She wasn't just confident. She was enjoying this. "Deathworlder," she murmured, just loud enough for Ethan to hear. "How fast do you think you are?" Ethan's gut clenched. He didn't know where she was going with this, but he knew that tone. She had a plan, and he had no choice but to follow along. The lead mercenary stepped closer, lowering his rifle just slightly. "You don't have to get hurt. Drop your weapons, come quietly, and..." Velthera moved. Fast. 1 second she was standing still. The next, she was in front of the leader, inside his guard, before anyone could react. Her hand shot up, grabbed his wrist, and twisted. Cracky. The reptilian mercenary roared in pain as Velthera dislocated his entire arm in one brutal motion. His weapon clattered to the ground, but before it could even hit the floor, she had already moved to the next target. Ethan had never seen anyone move like that. His brain barely had time to process it before the mercenaries wreaked it. "Open fire." Everything exploded into chaos. Ethan didn't think, he acted. He lunged sideways as the first plasma bolt seared past his face, grabbed the fallen mercenary's rifle, and fired 3 quick shots. Direct hits. 2 mercenaries went down instantly, their armor sizzling from the impact. The rest scrambled for cover, but Velthera was already on them. She was a blur of motion. One mercenary swung his rifle like a club. She caught it, yanked it from his hands, and snapped it in half like it was made of glass. Another tried to shoot her point blank, but she twisted her body at the last second, the shot missing by an inch. Then she struck, a single punch to the throat. The mercenary collapsed, gasping for air. Ethan was too busy fighting to be impressed. He fired another shot, hitting a sniper before they could get a clear angle. His movements were pure instinct. Duck, roll, fire, move. It was pure chaos. But in the midst of the gunfire, Velthera was laughing. Ethan gritted his teeth. "You're insane." She dodged another plasma shot effortlessly, then grabbed a mercenary by the collar, lifted him off the ground, and threw him across the tunnel. She turned back to Ethan, her golden eyes gleaming. "Took you this long to notice?" The last stand. The remaining mercenaries realized too late that they were losing. Half their squad was down, and the other half was either unconscious or too injured to fight. The lead mercenary, still cradling his shattered arm, stumbled backward in horror. "What the hell are you?" he rasped, staring at Velthera like she was a monster. Velthera's smile didn't fade. She crouched slightly, tilting her head. "Want to find out?" The reptilian mercenary snarled, tapping a device on his belt. A distress beacon. Velthera didn't stop him. She simply sighed. "Guess we'll be having more company soon." Ethan cursed under his breath. More mercenaries would arrive within minutes, and even though they had won this fight, they weren't in the clear yet. They had to move. He turned to Velthera. "We need to find a way off this station. Now." Velthera wiped a smear of blood off her cheek, looking completely unfazed. "Agreed." Ethan stepped over one of the fallen mercenaries, scanning the corridor for an exit. "You said you weren't raised on your home planet," he muttered. "You said you were raised on Earth." Velthera gave him a sideways glance, finally curious. "Huh?" Ethan didn't look at her. He just kept walking. "You fight like us," he said. "You move like us." He glanced at her, his eyes sharp. "But you're not human." Velthera's smirk returned. "Who said I wasn't?" Ethan stopped in his tracks. He turned to face her fully, his pulse quickening. "What?" Velthera tapped a finger against her temple. "You ever wonder why I can keep up with you, Deathworlder?" Ethan's stomach twisted. She was hiding something. Something bigger than just being raised among humans. Before he could press for answers, another alarm blared through the station. "Warning. Reinforcements arriving. Sequitur losiki dodoyan in piro juriestas." Velthera grinned. "Looks like we don't have time for a heart-to-heart. Ready for round 2. Ethan exhaled slowly. He had a feeling he wasn't getting answers anytime soon. He clenched his fists. "Let's move." They disappeared into the dark tunnels, just as another squad of mercenaries stormed in. The hunt was far from over. The hunter becomes the hunted. The metallic hum of the station vibrated under Ethan's boots as he sprinted through the tunnels, Velthera beside him. The alarms screamed overhead, flashing red lights painting the walls in pulses of warning. Behind them, the sound of approaching mercenaries echoed through the corridors. They were out of time. Ethan's breath came steady despite the chaos. He'd been in worse situations, trapped on a crumbling asteroid, stranded on an ice moon with a pack of alien predators, ambushed by bounty hunters. But this was different. Because for the first time, he wasn't sure if his biggest problem was the mercenaries hunting them, or the alien girl running beside him. Ethan had seen strong fighters. He had seen Deathworlders, battle-hardened soldiers who could rip a man's arm out of its socket with sheer brute force. But Velthera wasn't just strong. She was something else entirely. She didn't just fight. She danced through combat with an unnatural level of precision. She didn't just react. She anticipated. And the way she spoke, the way she moved, she wasn't just trained in human combat styles. She was born into them. Which meant one thing. She was lying to him. The only question was why. But Ethan didn't have time for that. Not now. They reached a large metal hatch at the end of the corridor. Ethan skidded to a stop and yanked the access panel open. The screen flickered, demanding the security code. "Locked," he muttered. "Figures." Velthera leaned against the wall, completely unfazed by the blaring alarms. "Want me to take care of it?" Ethan shot her a look. "Unless you know the code. I doubt it." She smirked. Then, before Ethan could stop her, she stepped forward and drove her fist straight through the panel. Cracky. Sparks erupted as the screen shattered, metal bending under her raw strength. The station's emergency failsafe immediately kicked in, and with a loud hiss, the hatch slid open. Ethan stared. Velthera dusted her hands off. Problem solved. Ethan exhaled slowly. She just punched through reinforced starship alloy like it was paper. She wasn't normal. But now wasn't the time to question it. He stepped through the hatch, Velthera following. The doors sealed shut behind them. They were in a cargo bay. Massive crates were stacked high, the dim glow of emergency lighting casting long shadows. The ceiling stretched far above them, with catwalks running along the upper levels. More importantly, there was a ship. A sleek black stealth vessel rested on the far end of the bay, its engines powered down but intact. It was their best chance off this station. Velthera whistled. Nice ride. Ethan was already moving toward it. Let's hope it's unlocked. They crossed the bay quickly, stepping past towering cargo containers. Ethan's mind raced. If they could power up the ship fast enough, they could break free before reinforcements arrived. Then Velthera froze. Ethan noticed immediately. Her posture shifted, subtle, but different. Her head tilted slightly, her golden eyes narrowing. Ethan trusted his instincts. "Trouble?" he asked quietly. Velthera didn't respond. Instead, she disappeared. 1 second, she was standing beside him. The next, she had vanished into the shadows. Ethan tensed. And then, a voice echoed from above. Well, took you too long enough." Ethan's blood ran cold. A figure stood on the catwalk above, draped in a sleek combat cloak, glowing blue cybernetic implants running along his arms. The mercenary leader. Ethan didn't recognize him. But the way the man stood, the confidence in his stance, the sheer lack of fear, he wasn't just another bounty hunter. He was a predator. And he wasn't alone. From the darkness, more figures emerged. Stealth operatives, their armor matte black, their weapons silent but deadly. A kill squad. Ethan clenched his fists. This wasn't an extraction mission anymore. They weren't here to capture. They were here to eliminate. The mercenary leader tilted his head, his cybernetic eye flashing. "Did you really think you could run, Carter?" Ethan exhaled, rolling his shoulders. "Depends. You planning to make me work for it?" The leader chuckled. "Oh, you'll work for it. But she's the real prize, isn't she?" His eyes flicked toward where Velthera had been. But she was gone. The leader's smile faded slightly. "Where is she?" Ethan allowed himself a small smirk. "Wouldn't you like to know?" Then, silence. A shadow moved. One of the mercenaries gurgled as a blade pierced his throat from behind. Another was yanked into the darkness. His body never hit the floor. The leader cursed. "She's here. Find her." Too late. Velthera dropped from the ceiling like a ghost. Her claws raked across one mercenary's visor, shattering it. She twisted midair, grabbed another soldier by the neck, and snapped it in one fluid motion. Ethan had never seen anything move like that, not even humans. The mercenaries panicked. They opened fire blindly into the shadows, but Velthera was already gone. Ethan used the distraction. He lunged forward, grabbed the nearest soldier, and slammed him into a cargo crate. The battle was over in seconds. Velthera emerged from the darkness, wiping blood off her wrist. She hadn't even broken a sweat. Ethan turned to the leader. The mercenary was alone now. He stepped back, his confidence gone. "You," his voice shook. "You're not just some alien." His cybernetic eye scanned Velthera frantically, calculating something. Then his expression shifted from fear to realization. His eyes widened. "Oh gods," he whispered. "You're one of them." Velthera's smirk disappeared. The mercenary took another step back. No, this wasn't the deal. They said you were just a hybrid." Velthera moved. A blur, a flicker of motion. She grabbed the leader by the throat before he could even finish his sentence. Ethan tensed. "Velthera," he warned. She didn't let go. Her golden eyes flickered, not with amusement, but with something far more dangerous. For the first time, Ethan saw it. Not a warrior. Not a Deathworlder. A predator. The mercenary leader gasped, choking. Please. Velthera leaned in, her voice a whisper. Wrong move. Then, with a flick of her wrist, she ended it. The leader crumpled. Silence. Velthera turned to Ethan, golden eyes glowing. For the first time, she looked serious. They know who I am, she said. Ethan exhaled. Then we need to move. Velthera nodded. And without another word, they boarded the stolen ship. The hunt wasn't over. It had just begun. The escape plan. The stolen ship hummed with raw energy as Ethan Carter settled into the cockpit, his fingers dancing over the controls. The stealth vessel was a beauty, sleek, fast, and built for silent infiltration. The perfect getaway vehicle. But there was one problem. Shields are down. Thrusters need 5 minutes to warm up, he muttered, his eyes scanning the holographic display. Weapon systems offline. Great. Behind him, Velthera leaned against the bulkhead, arms crossed. 5 minutes, she repeated. Ethan didn't like the way she said it. Yeah, he confirmed. Which means we need to hold off whoever shows up in the next. Boom. The ship shook violently as something massive slammed into the hull. The overhead lights flickered. A warning flashed across the screen. Unauthorized voarding in progress, Ethan swore. Velthera sighed. I was hoping for a smoother exit. Ethan spun to face her. You knew they'd try this. She shrugged. It was a possibility. Ethan's jaw clenched. You could have warned me. Velthera's smirk returned. Where's the fun in that? Ethan exhaled sharply. Of course. The ship rocked again, and this time, the distant sound of metal cutting through metal echoed through the hull. They're breaching the airlock, Ethan said grimly. He pulled a sidearm from his belt, checking the energy charge. 1 mag left. Velthera, on the other hand, didn't reach for a weapon. She stretched her arms lazily. We'll be fine. Ethan glared. Why are you so calm? Velthera gave him a look that sent a chill down his spine. Because, she said, they just locked themselves in here with us. Ethan wasn't sure what scared him more. The mercenaries trying to kill them, or the way Velthera was looking forward to it. The boarding party. The ship's main airlock hissed as it was forcefully overridden. The moment it slid open, a grenade rolled inside. Ethan reacted instantly. He grabbed Velthera by the shoulder and pulled her down, shielding her behind a control console just as. Boom. The explosion shook the ship, sending sparks and debris flying. Before the smoke even cleared, the mercenaries rushed in. Ethan counted 6, all heavily armed, moving in perfect formation. Not amateurs. These guys knew what they were doing. But they made one fatal mistake. They assumed Velthera was a normal opponent. She wasn't. The moment the first mercenary stepped forward, Velthera moved like a ghost. She lunged. Her claws flashed. Ethan heard the sickening crunch of bone before the mercenary even realized he was dead. The others reacted fast, spinning toward her. But Velthera was already gone. Ethan popped out from cover, fired 2 precise shots. Headshots. 2 mercenaries dropped instantly. That left 3. They tried to regroup, but Velthera was in their midst. One soldier swung his rifle at her. She caught it midair. With a single, impossible motion, she twisted the gun into scrap metal and slammed her knee into his chest. The last 2 opened fire. Ethan tackled Velthera to the floor just in time. Plasma bolts whizzed overhead, scorching the bulkhead. They hit the ground hard. Velthera pinned beneath him. She blinked up at him, smirking. If you wanted to get this close, you could have just asked. Ethan scowled. Shut up. He rolled off, taking cover behind a crate. The mercenaries were closing in. Ethan fired another shot, hitting one in the leg. The soldier collapsed, howling in pain. The last mercenary turned to flee. Velthera caught him by the throat. For a second, she just stared at him, studying him. The mercenary struggled, gasping. Ethan saw something flash in Velthera's eyes. Something cold. Then, she let go. The mercenary collapsed, scrambling away, his body shaking. Ethan frowned. You let him live. Velthera tilted her head. I wanted him to deliver a message. Ethan's gut twisted. What kind of message? But before he could ask, the ship's control panel flashed green. Thrusters online, the automated voice announced. Ethan turned back to Velthera. Time to go. She smirked. After you, Captain. The chase begins. The ship blasted out of the cargo bay like a bullet, its engines roaring as it tore through the station's outer shields. Ethan gritted his teeth as he pulled the controls, narrowly dodging a turret blast. They're trying to lock us down. Velthera was watching the sensors. 3 patrol ships incoming. Ethan muttered a curse. The enemy vessels were sleek, built for speed. They would never outrun them in open space. We need a jump point, Ethan said. Velthera's eyes gleamed. I know where to go. Ethan didn't like the sound of that. Where? She grinned. You ever heard of the Black Nebula? Ethan's stomach dropped. Oh, hell no. The Black Nebula was legendary. A stretch of space filled with unstable wormholes, electromagnetic storms, and gravitational distortions. Most ships that entered never came out. Ethan glanced at the incoming patrol ships. Then at Velthera's mischievous smirk. Then back at the patrol ships. He sighed. Setting course. Velthera chuckled. You're fun, Deathworlder. Ethan didn't answer. Because deep down he knew. This wasn't just an escape. This was the beginning of something bigger. The final revelation. The ship's engines roared as it hurtled toward the Black Nebula, a swirling, chaotic storm of cosmic energy and shifting gravitational forces. Lightning arsed through the thick clouds of dust and gas, and spatial distortions flickered in and out of existence, unstable wormholes that could either rip them apart or throw them across the galaxy. Ethan Carter gritted his teeth, hands steady on the controls as he pushed the ship forward. The sleek patrol ships behind them didn't hesitate. They followed. They're still on us, Velthera said, her tone far too casual for someone flying into a death trap. Ethan flicked a switch, diverting power to the shields. Not that it would help much. They're either suicidal, or whoever sent them wants us dead that badly. Velthera chuckled. It's cute how you think we're the ones in trouble. Ethan shot her a look. This isn't a game, Velthera. Her golden eyes gleamed. Isn't it? He didn't have time for her cryptic answers. The first enemy ship opened fire, plasma bolts streaking past them. The ship's AI blared a warning as the shields took a few grazing hits. Brace yourself, Ethan muttered. He jerked the controls, tilting the ship at a sharp angle. The vessel spiraled through a narrow corridor of debris. Ancient, shattered remnants of ships that had tried to pass through the nebula and failed. The patrol ships followed, more cautious, but keeping pace. Velthera leaned forward, eyes scanning the storm ahead. There's a rift opening on the starboard side. If we hit it at the right time, we'll be flung halfway across the sector. Ethan glanced at her, or torn apart at the atomic level. She grinned. 50-50. Ethan exhaled sharply. Great. Another barrage of plasma bolts rocked the ship. The enemy was closing in fast. They had seconds to decide. Velthera tilted her head. Scared, Deathworlder. Ethan scowled. Of dying. No. Of trusting you. Absolutely. She smirked. Then you'll love this next part. Before he could react, she slammed her hand down on the manual override, locking the ship's course toward the rift. Ethan's eyes widened. What the hell are you doing? She leaned back, arms crossed. Making a decision for you. The ship's sensors screamed as the gravitational field of the rift pulled them in. The enemy patrol ships tried to bank away at the last second, but they were too late. One was ripped apart instantly. The other was sucked in after them. Ethan barely had time to register the chaos before everything went white. The other side. The ship lurched violently, alarms blaring. Ethan's vision blurred as he was slammed back into his seat. For a moment, he felt weightless, like reality itself had unraveled. Then, they were somewhere else. The storm was gone. The turbulence ceased. Silence settled over them. Ethan gasped for air, hands still gripping the controls. His head pounded. What just happened? The ship's systems flickered back online, recalibrating. Ethan's gaze darted to the navigation screen. His stomach twisted. "We're over a dead system," he muttered. The planet below was a barren wasteland, no signs of life, no active signals, just an abandoned, forgotten place. Velthera exhaled slowly. "Perfect." Ethan turned to her, suspicion sharp in his voice. "You planned this." She didn't deny it. Instead, she stood and stretched, stepping toward the viewport. The golden light of a dying sun cast shadows across her face. "This is where we'll get answers," she said. Ethan frowned. "Answers to what?" She didn't turn around. "To who I am. The truth about Velthera." Ethan followed her out of the cockpit and into the ship's main hold. The mercenary patrol ship that had been sucked into the rift hadn't survived the jump. No signs of pursuit. For now, they were alone. Velthera walked to a control panel, tapping a few commands. A holographic projection flickered to life. It showed a facility. Not just any facility, a human lab. Ethan's blood ran cold. He recognized the architecture immediately. Black site research facilities, the kind that were erased from history. Velthera finally turned to face him. "You wanted to know who trained me," she said softly. "Who made me what I am?" Ethan swallowed. "Yeah." Velthera's expression was unreadable. "The answer is humans." Silence. Ethan's mind reeled. "That's not possible." She gave him a small, almost tired smile. "And yet, here I am." She gestured toward the hologram. "A long time ago, humans had a project. A secret experiment to see if Deathworlder genes could be spliced with alien DNA to create something better, something stronger." Ethan's breath caught. Velthera tilted her head. "They never meant to let me survive. I was an accident, a mistake that shouldn't have existed." Ethan stared at her. "You're telling me you're part human?" She nodded. "And now," she continued, her voice calm, "the people who made me are trying to erase me." Ethan exhaled slowly. It made too much sense. Her combat instincts, her unnatural strength, the way she moved like a human but wasn't. She was a living experiment, and someone wanted her gone. Ethan rubbed a hand down his face. "This is bigger than I thought." Velthera nodded. "And it gets worse." She zoomed in on the holographic projection. The facility was still active, and there was a message playing in a loop. Ethan stepped closer, his stomach twisting. The voice was robotic, but the words were clear. "Project Reclamation, Einheit Locate Antiramayan Akes, UBDGCT0. Velthera's smirk was gone. Ethan turned to her. "You're Subject 0. She nodded. Ethan exhaled sharply. "And now they know you're alive." A pause. Then Velthera smiled. "I'm counting on it." Ethan frowned. "What?" She stepped closer, her golden eyes gleaming. "This isn't just about running, Ethan." She tapped a command. The hologram shifted. Coordinates appeared. Coordinates leading straight to the black site facility. "I'm done hiding," she murmured. "It's time to go home." Ethan's heart pounded. This wasn't just an escape anymore. This was a war. And for the first time, Ethan wasn't sure who the real enemy was. Velthera looked at him, her voice softer this time. "You with me, Deathworlder?" Ethan held her gaze. Then he nodded. "Let's finish this." As the ship powered up, heading straight for the facility that created her, Ethan knew one thing for sure. Whatever they found at the end of this road, it would change everything. The return to hell. The stolen stealth ship cut through the void of space, its course locked on a destination Ethan Carter knew they shouldn't be approaching. The Black Site facility. As they neared the coordinates, the true scale of the operation came into view. A massive station, hidden within the remains of a shattered moon. The facility had been built into the rock, barely visible unless you knew exactly what to look for. A fortress buried in darkness. Ethan sat in the pilot's seat, hands steady, gaze locked on the station. He had infiltrated dangerous places before, but this was different. Because this wasn't just some hidden lab. This was a graveyard of forgotten sins, and Velthera had every intention of digging them up. Inside the lab of nightmares, the ship's stealth systems held as they landed in a blind spot near an old maintenance hatch. No alarms, no immediate response. Too quiet, Ethan muttered. Velthera checked the scans. They know we're coming. Ethan exhaled sharply. Of course they did. They descended into the tunnels beneath the station. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. The walls were stained with age, covered in long-forgotten markings. Then the lights flickered on. A voice echoed through the chamber. "Welcome home, Subject Zero." Velthera's fingers twitched. For the first time, Ethan saw something other than amusement in her eyes. Hatred. The corridor opened into a vast underground chamber. Dozens of containment units lined the walls, filled with darkened figures, preserved bodies, abandoned experiments. Ethan's stomach twisted. These were people, he muttered. Velthera nodded, her voice quiet. Test subjects. Like me. Ethan clenched his fists. This wasn't just a lab. It was a slaughterhouse. And at the center of it all stood a single figure. A tall man in an immaculate coat, silver hair slicked back, eyes cold and calculating. Dr. Adrian Voss. Ethan knew that name. A ghost. A scientist whose research had been buried decades ago. He smiled. "I was hoping you'd return, my dear. The monster who created her." Velthera stepped forward, not cautiously, not hesitantly, but with purpose. "You should be dead," she said. Voss chuckled. "And yet here we are." Ethan watched as Velthera's posture stiffened, her breath slowing. This wasn't just a mission to her. This was personal. "Tell me, Subject Zero," Voss continued, "how does it feel, knowing you were never meant to exist?" Velthera's jaw clenched. "You built me to be a weapon," she said. "And when I survived, you tried to erase me." Voss clasped his hands behind his back. "You misunderstand. We never wanted to erase you. We wanted to perfect you." Ethan's gut twisted. He recognized that tone. The same cold indifference of someone who saw life as a project. Velthera's fingers curled into fists. "You stole my life." Voss sighed. "And yet, look at you now. Magnificent." Ethan saw it before it happened. The slight shift in Velthera's stance. She lunged. A blur of motion, faster than the eye could track. But Voss didn't move. Because something else did. The shadows around him came to life. The other Deathworlders. Ethan barely had time to react before figures emerged from the darkness. They looked almost human, but their eyes were hollow, their movements unnatural. And they were fast. Velthera barely dodged as the first one struck, a woman with inhumanly sharp fingers, moving like liquid death. Ethan pulled his gun and fired. A direct hit. It didn't stop her. The bullet struck flesh, but the wound sealed instantly. Ethan's stomach dropped. They weren't just experiments. They were the ones that survived. Voss spread his arms. "Did you think we stopped with you, Velthera?" Velthera's breathing was steady, but Ethan could see it now. The ghosts of her past. The failures. The betrayals. The truth. Ethan gritted his teeth. "We need to move." But Velthera wasn't running. She roared. Not in fear. In fury. The fight exploded. The Deathworlders' last stand. Velthera tore through the first soldier, her claws ripping through muscle and bone. She moved like a force of nature, fluid, deadly, unstoppable. But they weren't stopping either. Two came at her at once, their strikes inhumanly fast. Velthera twisted, dodging, countering, but they adapted. For the first time, they matched her. Ethan took down one, blasting his head clean off. But another was already behind him. It moved too fast, too precise. Ethan barely dodged the strike aimed at his throat. Velthera saw it, and she snapped. A sound ripped through the chamber, a sound Ethan had never heard before. A pulse, a ripple of unseen energy burst from Velthera's body, and suddenly everything stopped. The other experiments froze. Then they collapsed. Dead. Velthera stood in the center of it all, her golden eyes glowing. Ethan stared at her. What was that? Velthera exhaled slowly. I don't know. Voss, despite everything, was still smiling. Fascinating. Ethan raised his gun. You lose. Voss didn't seem concerned. Do I? The facility shook. Velthera's eyes widened. Self-destruct. Voss spread his arms. You think I'd let you have the last move? Alarms blared. The station was collapsing. Ethan grabbed Velthera's wrist. We need to go. Now. She hesitated for just a second. Then she turned back to Voss. You don't get to control me anymore, she said. She fired a single shot. Straight between his eyes, Voss collapsed, his smile frozen forever. And then, the world exploded. Freedom. The stolen ship soared through the debris as the black site facility was swallowed in fire. Ethan sat in the cockpit, hands tight on the controls. The station was gone. Velthera stood behind him, watching the burning wreckage disappear into the void. She was free. Ethan turned to her. What now? Velthera smirked. Now, we find out what else they're hiding. Ethan sighed. Of course. He powered up the engines. The galaxy wasn't ready for them. But that was too damn bad. Because two Deathworlders were on the hunt, and nothing was going to stop them.